What's up, 8 Pushers? Today we're going to cover John F. Kennedy, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, president from 1961 to 1963. So not a lot of time passes, but there's some pretty important things that go down. He's one of America's most famous presidents, as you are probably well aware. So we'll get started over here with the election of 1960. It's between Richard Milhous Nixon, who was Dwight D. Eisenhower's vice president, and it's also going to be against, of course, John F. Kennedy. It is the first televised debate ever. It's the first presidential debate ever, and so this is pretty important because if you heard the presidential debates on the radio, you thought that Nixon won. The polls show that Nixon won. But if you watched it on TV, you saw that Kennedy had the confidence, he had the good looks, he had the charm, and so people said Kennedy won if they saw it on television. So it's very important the role that television is going to play from the 1960s onward to today. JFK, as president, is going to promise a new frontier. He is going to say that he's going to fix education, he's going to fix the economy, he's going to fix healthcare, and he's also going to fix, he says with the stroke of a pen, that he's going to fix civil rights in America. But he doesn't do things right away, he does a lot of things reluctantly. And so a lot of civil rights leaders will actually mail him pins and be like, maybe all you need is a pin, Mr. President, because when you were running, you promised us with the stroke of the pen that you would solve the problem. All right, his inauguration speech, it inspires youth and it inspires confidence. And it's actually a very hawkish speech. It's basically saying that, look, Russia, stay out of our hemisphere. It's kind of like the Monroe Doctrine all over again. And he says the torch has been passed to a new generation. And basically what that means is that there's a new confidence that's in America, and that confidence is really going to die whenever he gets assassinated. All right, and he also says, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Meaning you don't need a handout from the government. How can you help your country? And some people are going to take that message to heart, and they're going to volunteer to go over to Vietnam, or they're going to volunteer to join the Peace Corps. And so he really inspires youth and confidence. Moving over to the Cold War abroad, so basically day one on the job, there's the Bay of Pigs invasion. Remember that Fidel Castro took over Cuba, and the plan is that we're going to train these Cuban exiles through the CIA. They're going to go over there, they're going to overthrow the government of Fidel Castro. We're going to not only contain communism, but roll it back. It turns into an epic failure. They get caught, we have to negotiate for their release. It's a very embarrassing thing, and because of that, JFK is going to be seen as weak. Immediately after that, Khrushchev tells John F. Kennedy, you need to get your troops and your people out of Western Berlin, and of course Kennedy says no. There's lots of tensions there, there's some meetings that happen, but bottom line what you need to know is that the USSR is going to build the Berlin Wall, and that is going to divide East and West Berlin all the way until you get to 1989, and then in 1991 the Cold War will end. In terms of the space race, the Russians who launched Sputnik up in space, the first satellite, are now going to shoot Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin into space, so he's the first person in space. 2 weeks later, we replicate that with Alan Shepard, and then JFK promises by the end of the moon we will go to the. Promises by the end of the decade the United States will go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things not because they're easy, but because they're hard. All right. So in 1962, we also have one of our people orbit the planet. All right, so it's a pretty, John Glenn is his name, it's a pretty, the space race is definitely on now, and it's a race to get to the moon. The Cuban Missile Crisis, our U-2 spy planes, we spot nuclear weapons in Cuba. Khrushchev is told by John F. Kennedy, you need to remove those. He says, I will not do it, I feel threatened by you. And so ultimately Kennedy says, if you send more nuclear weapons, or if you fail to remove those nuclear weapons, you have just declared war on the United States. And so it's basically this big game of chicken with nuclear war. And if those ships get close to Cuba, then war will be declared. And those ships get very, very close. And at the last possible moment, Khrushchev turns the ships around, and JFK says that he will not invade Cuba, and that he will take down nuclear weapons in Turkey. We come this close to nuclear war. It could have all been over in 1962. All right. Also in Vietnam, if you remember, under Truman, we gave the French aid. We gave them $1 billion, but then they lost at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, and that led to the Geneva Peace Accords, and the country gets divided. On the north is Ho Chi Minh and communism, and in the south is our government run by Diem, who's not very popular with the people, and we canceled their elections, and so we're fighting the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, who are communist in the south. Well, basically what we're doing is we we create ARVID, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, and it's created by the Green Berets. We are training them, and when they go out to fight, they lose at the Battle of Ot Bok, and it's very clear that something is wrong in Vietnam. Maybe we need to send more troops because the Vietnamese army is not doing so well. Buddhist monks, in protest of our buddy Diem, who's very unpopular with the people and very unsympathetic, he takes away people's lands, he puts people in jail. They light themselves on fire. And this is really the first time that people have heard of Vietnam because it's caught on CBS News. And so after this event, people in America are going, what is happening in Vietnam? What is going down? And so we authorize Arvin to overthrow Diem, but they end up killing him in the process. All right. So the next thing that we have over here is the civil rights movement. And this is where some very good things are going to happen, but there's also going to be a lot of setbacks. So the sit-in movement is continuing. It started under Eisenhower, starting in Greensboro, North Carolina. But the next major thing is freedom rides. Like Montgomery bus boycott ended discrimination in busing. All right. But now the goal here is to desegregate busing nationwide. And these freedom riders risk their lives going from Washington, D.C. all the way to New Orleans. Some of them are going to be beat within an inch of their life, left for dead. The KKK stops one of the buses and firebombs them. But basically what happens after this is the movement picks up, the federal government starts giving support, and all of a sudden they are successful. All right, so once busing is desegregated nationally, the goal next is to desegregate cities. And so they go to Albany, Georgia, and the goal is to desegregate the entire city. But ultimately the police chief, his name is Laurie Pritchett, and he refuses to use violence, and ultimately the move is an epic failure. James Meredith, it's a repeat performance of the Little Rock 9 situation. James Meredith wants to go to the University of Mississippi. He's allowed in, but the governor gets up there and says that blacks are not allowed on this campus, has the troops there, and then Kennedy has to send troops. And the campus turns into a riot. Ultimately, James Meredith will be allowed in, and he will succeed there. In terms of Birmingham movement, nicknamed Birmingham because of all the black homes that get bombed, Albany was a failure, so the goal now is to desegregate the most racist city in America. And this is Birmingham, Alabama. And to do that, the police chief, his name is Bull Connor, he is not afraid to use violence. He is not afraid to lock people up. And so basically there's so many people getting arrested that the civil rights movement is running out of people down here. So Dr. King has an idea about recruiting high school kids, and the high school kids actually bring their little brothers and sisters along with them in a peaceful march. Day 1 of the march, nothing really happens, but day 2, the police chief starts using fire hoses, whips, chains, and these are on kids. Like some of these fire hoses could take the bark off of a tree, and it's being used on a 6-year-old, and you'll see them go flying off or hitting some of the other high school kids. And so ultimately this is caught on television, and basically what happens is the federal troops are going to be sent in again, and you're going to have the whole city is ultimately going to become desegregated. An interesting thing that happens here is a letter from a Birmingham jail. Dr. King is going to be arrested, one of 56 times that he gets arrested. I believe that number is correct. And he's going to say, look, the civil rights movement, some people say that we're going too fast, that we need to take our time and go a little bit slower. But he's like, that will never achieve our ends because we've been waiting for freedom since Reconstruction, and it hasn't happened yet. Like, when are people going to unite and say that now is the time? Okay? So after Birmingham, it's very clear there's this idea about marching on D.C., and JFK is not in support of it because he thinks it's going to turn into race riots. In the meantime, a guy from Florida who's an NAACP field secretary, he investigates crimes against black people. He's going to be shot basically at a drive-by. There's going to be a drive-by, and he's going to be shot in his front driveway as he comes home from work in front of his wife and kids. It makes the newspapers. And people are going, oh my gosh, is this still happening in America? Like, it's Birmingham and now this? Like, seriously? Wow, this white resistance is not stopping or letting up. The march on Washington, D.C., ultimately 250,000 people show up. Anybody that's anybody in Hollywood and in politics is there. And it is peaceful. There are no instances of violence. And Dr. King is going to give his I Have a Dream speech. And also what you really need to know is that John F. Kennedy is going to propose a civil rights bill. He now officially supports the civil rights movement and says that he is going to pass legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It seems like everything's great. The I Have a Dream speech, it's very touching, it's very awesome, except a couple months later you had the 16th Street church bombing in Birmingham, Alabama. and you're going to have 4 little girls get killed there. The Ku Klux Klan is going to start this bomb at a church on Sunday, and the sermon that day was going to be a love that forgives. And so this is kind of a dark chapter, and the Civil Rights Movement really gets a little bit darker and scary when you get to Lyndon B. Johnson. All right, we're going to try to wrap things up pretty quick here. In terms of the new left, new liberalism, the old liberalism was fixing the economy under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but now it's about social equality. So for women, Betty Friedan is going to write her book, The Feminine Mystique, and basically the main context of the book is women are unhappy just with the cult of domesticity and being housewives. A lot of them had jobs in World War II, and now they're like, is this it? Is this my whole life? And so it really starts picking up momentum with women and trying to get outside the home and have equality. The birth control pill comes into the forefront during this time, and it causes a bunch of debate in America about should this thing be allowed or not, should states outlaw it. In terms of the Chicano movement, you've got Dolores Huerta and you've got Cesar Chavez. They start the United Farm Workers Union, and basically they're boycotting any company that does not treat their workers properly, that uses migrant workers, and they're just gonna boycott, and it's gonna catch on to the United States. The Native Americans are going to create AIM, the American Indian Movement, and Rachel Carson writes a book called Silent Spring that starts the environmental movement. In terms of the Warren Court, Engel versus Vitale, no prayer in school, so the way that I remember it is take the E, put an A there, and it's Angel versus Vitale, so maybe a little mnemonic device to help you remember. And then Gideon versus Wainwright, rights of the accused and poor people can have an attorney. Basically what happened in this court case was a man was arrested, couldn't afford an attorney, and didn't have the full due process of law that the Constitution guarantees. In terms of culture, it's rock and roll, television, teenagers, but when Kennedy gets assassinated, which brings us up here, that optimism, that youth, that vitality, that starts segueing into counterculture and rejection of things and being skeptical of government. And when Lyndon B. Johnson becomes president, he has these lofty ideas, but they're quickly going to be dissipated by the events in Vietnam. So The Bullet That Kills John F. Kennedy by Lee Harvey Oswald kills much more than just the president, also kills American confidence. So here you go, ladies and gentlemen, the election of 1960, the Cold War abroad, the Civil Rights Movement, New Left, the Warren Court, and culture. So there, of course, there's a lot of content here. It is the Cold War. It's loaded with content. So make sure you're studying your notes, taking your time, and really absorbing this information. So the A-Push exam isn't too far off. May the Force be with you.